In just a minute, people. Hey Marius, starting in just a minute. There were some technical difficulties with the YouTube, but it is now running. So yeah, let's go in a few seconds. I've got 20 seconds yet. The YouTube is working great. Great. Okay, where are we? For 10 seconds. Hope you're having a good morning. Okay, hello everybody. It's 8 o'clock New York time on Friday the 17th of November. We're at the end of a week. We've got some news coming up in the next hour and we've also got OPEX. But first of all, let us do the disclaimers. All Bookmap Limited materials, information and presentations are for educational purposes only and should not be considered specific investment advice nor recommendations. Trading futures, equities and digital currencies involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Okay, with that being said, there are the screens as we approach the breakfast hour. I'm going to digress here and go into the context. Let's have a look here. We've got a couple of people there, and yeah, we've got some people on YouTube. Welcome everybody. If you have any questions, please ask. I'm a little bit better than I was the other day. I think I was just a little bit tired and croaky. So let's have a look at the slideshow. Okay. Let's wait for that to come up for YouTube. Okay, so the main news here is, well, actually, you can see all the news. So during our hour of power, we've got housing starts or building permits, whichever particular way you like to look at that. That is coming at 8:30, and the fact that we are right at the top of the ranges may be an excuse for them to have yet another pop up, but we shall see. Okay, let's have a look at the dailies. You can see it's looking like a perfect V now, isn't it? Or even, yeah, you could almost say it's a head and shoulders or an inverse head and shoulders as well. But what is of note is that we are approaching, or if we've taken out one little high there, we've got another significant swing high just coming up at the 4.6 level, the 4,600. And then you've got a major high at around the 4.7 level. So they're all potentially within range, especially if everybody now believes that we're into interest rate cuts territory. Okay, NQ stronger than ES. We've taken out the equivalent high already in NQ, and we're marching towards this high. So we know that we've already taken out 16,000 during that news release on Tuesday, the CPI. So let's see if we get back up there in the next hour. Okay, the 10-minute, the shaded grey is ETH, and you can see that once again we're in a very bullish position. ES was well above yesterday's high and really has hardly flickered below yesterday's high. So very bullish in ES, and NQ is hovering around yesterday's high, and importantly we're within striking distance of the overnight high as we speak. Okay, what we didn't do last time is have a look at the TPOs in any depth. So since we've got a little bit of time before 8:30, let's have a look at those. Let's drag it across. Let's make it quite a bit bigger. I won't blow it up that big, but let's just have a look. I think the first thing I want to look, before we look at where we are in relation to yesterday's range, which is yesterday there and the day before that, basically we're around this 3-day range. In fact, there's two ways of looking at this. If we just merge, in fact, it's not doing that for me. Sometimes it does. Come on. Merge profile begin, merge profile end. That gives you an idea that we are really coming out of the 3-day value in ES, and it looks very strongly like it's exploring up or about to explore up. That is what it looks like. Again, nothing can predict the future, so that is just what it is showing us at the moment. So we'll reset that. The other thing I wanted to have a look at on the TPO was really the potential of what you can do what you can do in ETH. So let's just scroll back for the entire week, including that ridiculous day of Tuesday, which is going to be marked Monday here because it started at Monday. Let's get rid of that. It started at Monday at 1800 hours in New York. But let us have a look. Okay. I think what I really like to note is that if we look at the RTH range and we split them up and we see where the last value was on each occasion, it gives you an idea that the RTH was finishing really strongly, and that gave you an idea. Again, I'm repeating myself, that we were never going to have that bearish a day down in ETHs, and in fact, if we got anywhere even towards yesterday's mid, that could have been a potential buy. It's just the way we were setting up all week. And we can continue this on. We had that ridiculous session with CPI. I call it ridiculous because that is one heck of a range. And then again, if you split that one as well, you can see that that ended towards its high, and then we had another exploration higher. And split some of these. Let's split this one as well. This was the only day that was balanced and choppy, which is really that one that led into a nice balanced session in ETH. So what I'm trying to show is that is two things. One, we're in a period where we've got significant volatility, whether it's in RTH and ETH, and that means that for ETH you are going to get opportunities, so that patience can be paramount. I know that when I'm doing some of these webinars and I'm doing live order flow commentary, I'm being pretty impatient because I'm trying to show you things, and we're almost forcing the market to actually show us things, which is exactly the opposite of the way that anybody should trade. It's just because we have 1 hour and we're doing this live, so sometimes we get things to talk about and sometimes we don't. And the other thing is that nothing is totally predictive. I think the best stats I've seen which are reliable on anything to do with the markets is about 80%. But one stat that is quite suggestive or has a good probability is where is the last little distribution at the end of the RTH session going into settlement. And that can be quite indicative of what is to come in ETH. So regardless of when you trade in ETH, and there are 4 sub-sessions that we talk about in ETH, or 4 that I talk about. Sorry, I'm just checking a couple of things in Discord. There is the post-settlement session, which is the extension of the US session, which goes on basically from settlement 4 o'clock onwards until the market closes, and also after it reopens right up until the Japanese open. So I call that like the post-US session. Then you've got the Asian session, which is the Japanese and Chinese sessions, which is really all about their open and their morning and early afternoon. Then you've got the third one is the European open session, which is the German and the London ones, which really opens from 10 to 2 a.m., 1:50 a.m., and that really runs for 2, 3, 4 hours. And then you have this session, which actually starts earlier than we do these webinars. I call this the breakfast or overlap session, the overlap between the end of the European mornings and the US RTH session. So you've got 4 sessions. They tend to have completely different characteristics, but once you've you've played in them a few times, as long as you have a trading system and a trading plan and you can adapt, and a lot of this game is about your ability to adapt, you can trade in any of those 4 sessions. You just have to be aware that they do have different characteristics, but you can pick those up just by reviewing what's happened for the last few sessions. And the markets do change behaviors and characteristics. So anything that may have happened a couple of months ago may well be irrelevant now. So one of the things I don't tend to do, and I probably do not talk about in these sessions, is that I don't compile statistics going back years and years and years. I know seasonality can often apply, and I do look at seasonality, but I don't look at a lot of market statistics from 6 months ago because they may well not be relevant to what we're doing right now. That's why when I do my statistics, and I can drag those in a second, I'm looking at the last 2 or 3 weeks of what's happened in the markets. And yeah, talking of that, let's see if we can drag in the statistics for the ETH session for today. You can see, yeah, ES, let's have a look at ETH actually. We're about 50% of the potential ETH range for either ES, which is the one on the left, and NQ on the right. So even though we've got good relative volume, we haven't had smashing range. Why is that? Again, we don't know why, but we can surmise or guess that they're saving their powder or saving their guns for what's about to happen during the OPEX in RTH, and also this news on the housing starts in a few minutes. So the ETH session coming up to these OPEXs tends to be a little bit strange, and OPEX itself can be a little bit strange. So you've just got to be patient, and you've got to take your stops. That is what I would do personally. You know, if you're wrong, you're wrong. It's far better to take a small stop than just let it get out of control. Okay. Good morning, CMJ. Hope you're going really, really well. Okay. Let's have a quick little look before we go on to the NQ TPOs, which are actually a little bit more interesting than the ES ones. Let's have a look at where we are again. So I've got the Trader Map Pro here. I've got them both, so I can toggle between them again. I haven't actually looked at the normal one for a little while, but let's have a quick look on this is NQ, and you can see that nice bounce right at the beginning of this breakfast session, and it's a little bit cleaner here. So I'm finding that these blocks or stable blocks of liquidity are providing some value to my trading, but again, nothing is 100%. And their usage also varies. Sometimes they're really, really good as targets. Sometimes they're useful for identifying potential reversal points. So, you know, where you're stalking an entry, they can be useful. Again, there's some nuance, there's correlations, there's time of day, all sorts of things. So there's no hard and fast rules about how you'd use any of these static liquidity. But one thing to note is that, as I've always said, the longer that this liquidity has been resting, the more interested I get in it. And in that sense, the one that interests me the most is the one up here towards 15,934 in NQ. I haven't actually marked it in my columns there, but that is one that I am watching with bated breath come the 8:30 release. In other words, you know, we could well have a pop. I'm just looking at the 3-minute, for example. We're right at the high of the day, and it could go exploring up right now. It'd be quite interesting to see if they pop this right into the news release, i.e. if they move it up beforehand, because that makes the release a little bit more interesting to read. So talking about NQ, let's just drag it over. Why did I want to? I'm not going to go through the ETH sessions in the way that I did with ES, but what I did want to do is merge with next profile and merge that one with the next profile. Okay, I just wanted to show this 3-day distribution because it's much smoother, it's much cleaner, it's much clearer in NQ at the moment than it is in ES. So you can see this delineation point. I'd probably mark it here. So let me just mark in a resistance, which will appear in Bookmap somewhere around there. That ledge point, you know, where we end the distribution, we go through a slightly skinnier patch. So it will be interesting to see whether we blast through that and then go towards the week's high. But I'm finding, you know, when you have this 3-day distribution, you can often create a bell curve. And what is a trading range? A trading range is, let me time to draw. A trading range is essentially a range from there to there, and it's often delineated by price, and it can often be more clearly delineated by this type of bell curve. You know, that beautiful bell curve. People often talk on this daily volume profile stuff of value added high and value added lows at 70%. I don't think that applies unless you've got a beautiful bell curve. I think it's completely irrelevant if you do not have such a bell curve. But this is very, very pretty. So you know, if we were drawing them here, let me just ditch those lines. You know, it depends where you draw. You could even draw them. You could draw one right at the top there, and you could draw one another one right down there, for example. And that is a beautiful distribution. And on every time frame, there is some form of distribution like that. Here, it's over a 3-day distribution, and I'm talking about a range. So I'm just saying that because these markets happen to be so fractal, you can find some kind of range that they're going, that they've got supply at the top, demand at the bottom, if you look hard enough. One thing that I do as well in my trading, it's not in Bookmap. Dear, come on. Let me just get rid of all of that. Go back to the cursor so I can get rid of this. That I don't do in Bookmap, but in my actual bar charts, I tend to have 2 charts, and they're for fractal purposes. They're not typically, I'm not talking about the 10-minute chart, which I use just to tell me how we're progressing in the day. There'll be 2 charts. One will be a very short time frame. Just trying to get rid of that chart. And the other one will be either lower or higher. So most people will often keep just a higher time frame as reference for their other chart. What I tend to do with my other chart is that I'm intrigued to know where the ranges are, whether it's on a lower or a higher time frame. So I will quickly flick between them. It sometimes helps if I go both above and below to see what is happening on different fractal time frames. Okay, quick time check, 8:16. Let's have a look. Let's have a look over at ES because we haven't really talked about ES coming into this one. Let's zoom all the way out again. So that liquidity, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's been there before today. And I know I've got it all the way back to 1800 New York time, but I think that's been there 2 or 3 days at 4545. So those often get hit, but again, nothing in trading is 100%. But the fact that it's been there this long means that at some point somebody wanted to advertise that they were willing to trade up there. And that brings us to the point again of, you've got to make sure that when you use this liquidity that you have your own trading plan and that it encompasses in some detail how you use this resting liquidity. It's got to be something that you do through your own research, not through Tom talking about it, through me talking about it, or Bruce talking about it. It has to be something that you have tried and tested yourself before you put it into your trading plan and before you put your hard-earned money into trades that encompass it. Okay, so we look back at ES and let's just zoom out a couple of hours. No, this is 2 hours so far. So this little liquidity here that we're just approaching now, which is at the week's high, the week's high, which was on that TPO I showed, that's been there for a good 2.5 hours. And if we flick across to the Trader Map Pro chart, I'm using this more as a high level map in ES because I have not found a really, really good size filter that makes me want to stick with it. So this is just a filter that is filtering out any orders in the book that have changed by price or size. So in other words, this filter is identical to the filter over here in NQs. I'd call it almost like a static map filter. But it's interesting that we're coming right up to this weekly high. If you were around for the first 30, 40, 50 minutes of the London Open, all they were doing really was chopping around to get some fuel to go and stop hunt. So if you look at the NQ chart from earlier, you'll see that they tagged home. They tagged yesterday's settlement because, as we know, there's often order imbalance there, and they also tagged the stops above yesterday's high. So nothing really has changed. We're a little bit bullish. We're a little bit above yesterday's daily high. But if you can look across in the NQ, you can see that settlement is very close to yesterday's high. So it's not a tremendous amount of change. We're just in this bullish, almost holding pattern going into this news and options expiry. And let's zoom in on what is actually being traded. We'll go back to the normal map. It's actually quite clear. So on this occasion, there isn't a tremendous advantage of using the Trader Pro in ES, and you've also got the MBO stops and icebergs, which you can't use in the Trader Pro. So you've got a sizable MBO stop run there on this little high at 815. So that's 437. That's quite significant. In ordinary circumstances, that would be one of the triggers that I would use in my triggers to either scalp against or to use it as a swing point for a trade for something that was more than a scalp. So in other words, I'm just saying that this is a large number at this time of the day. So that's just unusual because we're right under a level where I thought they'd slam it through to look for some stops, but on this occasion they look like they're just testing to it, found some stops and are holding at the moment. But there's no major rejection there. One of the things that I find useful in Bookmap and also in my charts is these vertical lines. You can see them more clearly here in NQ. Yes, sometimes I don't need to see MBO stops in NQ. When I see these lines, they're like a stop. They're just a quick flush to go and get something, and then they often turn around and go back to exactly where they came from. It may not be immediately, but it's likely at some course in the next half hour to hour. So it's just one of those things. That's why I have these price lines there. I think that's the main reason that I do, so I can actually see these vertical lines. And it has to be completely obvious, otherwise I totally disregard it. So where it's coming down like this, that's a lovely channel. We can draw a line. Let's just draw a normal line. You can get a lovely channel down. And you can see the difference between this one, which was straight up. That's what interests me. And then you can see that it takes it all back almost straight away. And then again, you have this little flush up. And now we're channeling down. So the idea there is to see the contrast between these flushes and then the steady progressive movement. Okay. And that's something that Bookmap can help you do in a way that you can't do on some platforms, because you can zoom into this both vertically and on the time axis, so you can get right down to the microsecond. So you can, sometimes when we've got highly volatile action in RTH, you can really see those flushes more clearly on this than you can in a traditional charting platform. Okay, I'm just checking on comments. No, there's nothing really coming up. Trying to remember exactly why I had that level there as well. I'm just looking at this little yellow level and reminding myself why I had it. I think it was resting liquidity. Yes, the resting liquidity. And I should also have marked the liquidity up at 33.34, so I might just do that now. If you can excuse me, I'll just do that in Sierra so we have that marked. And it should appear in Bookmap in a few minutes, in 60 seconds. So it should appear just there. Again, as I said, with the cloud notes, it can take up to a total of 60 seconds. I think the refresh cycle is 60 seconds. So depending on when you put your cloud note together, it can either be 1 second or up to 60 seconds, depending on where within the 60-second cycle we currently are. Okay, let's just have a look here. Just trying to keep the picture on ES as clear as possible as we are going into this news. And again, something that I reiterate that I have to do for my own eyes is that I do have to zoom in and out vertically to try and get this kind of picture. If you screenshot that now in ES, that is what I call one of those clear pictures where I can see where the liquidity 1, 2, 3, even 4 levels are, and that the lower liquidity is shaded but not really getting in the way. And what I'm watching here is this week's high up here to see whether we can flush through that and hit some stops before we have that news release. And I'm going to turn on what's time is it now? 8:24. In a couple of minutes I'll turn on the Financial Juice feed. Again, if you can't hear it in Discord, I apologize. I think in YouTube it is definitely being played. So the fact, let me, um, the fact, if I just drag one of these charts here, let me just drag a chart. This is one of my charts. This is not the execution chart, but if I just change this to a 10-second chart, just for 1 second, you can just see they've been knocking on the door. And if we have a range on that, it's basically around about there. It's not my execution chart, but I do see my orders on it. It's one of the reasons why I trade in Sierra, that I can have my orders appear on multiple charts, even if it's not directly the one that I place my orders on. I have got my trading engine turned on, but I'm not expecting to be able to double task or multitask and talk about what's happening at 8:30 and then take a trade. I just don't think you have the mental space or just the level of calmness you need to trade and also talk live about what's happening on this heat map. So I'm just saying that we're at the top of this range. You know, we may go back to the bottom of this little range again and again and again until they've got the fuel to blast their way through, and that's looking like what they want to do. You know, ordinarily we then scroll across and see, are they trapping any sellers in this zone, or where are they trapping any sellers? So we'd scroll horizontally to look where they are, and you can see these red tails. So I find that if you are looking at these resting liquidities, these tails are important. So you can work out, in fact, I think they're more important than the actual resting liquidity, just so that you know that the fuel might be there for that reversal, you know, whether it's a small reversal or a major reversal. So you can see we're at this top of the range. We've top ticked a couple of times. So here we might have topped it once, twice, 3 times. Then we might pop down to the bottom of that range, and we'll see how far we get to down there before we have any further attempt to go back up again. Every time they go down there, you might want to scroll in so you can see what that red tail is building like. So as you know, if we get a little flush down, you know, you can also look at this vertically and see if it is a proper flush down, and that's where I'm saying, you know, have we got that vertical type line, which may help us to get back up. But remember, it can go completely the other way as well. Yeah, who knows what this news will be like? Maybe it will be negative in the sense that the market thinks it's negative and will plunge. So again, we cannot predict the future. The fact that we've got liquidity above in both ES and NQ does not mean that we will necessarily go up. We will not necessarily tag this liquidity or this liquidity. It's just one possibility. Okay, I'm going to turn on that news feed now, and that should be running. Okay, I'm checking that I can hear it as well. Yep, I'll be able to hear that too. So they're not actually talking at the moment. Double checking that is coming up. Yep, it's coming up. It's just a little bit quiet. Normally, Financial Juice would be talking non-stop for the couple of minute lead into a major news item. There's also some Fed speakers later as well. So at actually within our breakfast hour, we've got Fed Collins, Fed Barr, and afterwards we've got Fed's Daily and Fed's Goolsby. Never come across that one before. Goolsby. Okay, I'm not up to speed on the current Fed speakers. So again, as I said, with this, you're looking to see what kind of fuel they've got to get back to, for example, this liquidity here. And you're also looking to see what might have traded at the bottom. I mean, if there was an unfinished auction, doesn't mean that we're going to come back and tag it immediately or even any time really soon. It's just the probability is high that we will eventually come back and take it out, because the market under auction theory or may not have finished exploring in that direction. That's what an unfinished auction is really all about. So okay, we have 1 minute. Hopefully people on YouTube could hear that from Financial Juice. In fact, we've got 45 seconds. So once again, once we have some action, I will mark. I may get the pen ready now with a horizontal line. I will mark in ES where the scene of the crime is, and we'll see how the market behaves in relation to that scene of the crime. The scene of the crime is where we were before any pop in either direction. It has to be a pop, otherwise I won't bother marking it. And I would be anticipating a pop above the week high, at least looking for the stops above there. 10 seconds. Here we go. So let's watch the 4545 if they can get there. So that's gone down. We haven't really had a pop, so there's no point marking a scene of the crime. And you saw NQ had a little pop down, a flush, and we've already reclaimed it. So what can we deduce, surmise, etc., from the lack of volatility or activity? Well, maybe two things, or maybe three things. One, the news wasn't, or the actual, I'll turn off the news feed by the way, the actual news that was released was not of that much interest yet to the markets. Secondly, the markets might be waiting for those Fed speakers. Thirdly, the market might be waiting until the RTH opened for doing some weird OPEX action. But so far, we're just chopping around. I know we've come down a little bit in NASDAQ, but nothing really, really significant has happened. I mean, if you go back to Tuesday, that's when you want to go and put replay onto your charts and look what happened, and the way that after it exploded up on CPI, which is often the big one, that it never really looked back. Okay, so we've had a nice little down break here. I've got the volume dots really turned down, so there has to be a significant volume to actually trigger a dot at the moment, just because I wanted to focus on showing you the flush type lines, but I've forgotten what it is. It's 25. So you need a volume of 25 to actually see any of those dots. Again, it's because I am not one of those people that really trades on the basis of those dots. I do have visual time and sales. I've got traditional time and sales, and I've also got a visual time and sales. So I'm aware of when the big trade's in. For example, we just had a trade, a sell of 65 in NASDAQ, and we've had two buys of 101 and 83 in ES. So I'm aware at all times of the sizes of orders that are going in. Since I know what they are, I don't get a tremendous benefit from having those dots. Plus, I am more interested in this kind of delta tail. Because now if you look at this tail, this is really worth looking at. And you see there how red that is, right? And what does that mean? It means if they can get above it, they can get some juice to go and hit some of these yellow blocks that I've marked, for the resting liquidity, etc. And again, where do we get down to? We still held yesterday's high. I know I drew it as a zone rather than a price level, but at the moment it's holding. And remember, we're way, way above the ES yesterday's high, which is down there at 425.50. And if we do zoom vertically, you can see all we're doing is tapping on this liquidity underneath the weekly high. So the fact that it could not get down even when NQ had a little move down is quite bullish. And the other thing we can do is zoom vertically, and we can have a look at all these tiny little fractal swing points. And again, that's where I find that the dark grey price lines that I've got tend to help me sort of, have they really made any progress? Even the times they actually broke this little swing here, you can see it was a little zip back up. If I drag that across, down and straight back up. Yeah, same again here, down and straight back up. So there doesn't look to have been any real appetite to make any progress to go south. It does not mean we won't have a big bearish trend day down in RTH. We could do, who knows what will happen. But at the moment, there is not that much appetite for going down. I mean, when you see that kind of action, that's also important. Much earlier in the ETH, if for example we were channeling up on ES or NQ looking for, key levels like settlement or yesterday's high, and you kept seeing this. This is what I've talked about a lot on the microstructure. That the appetite might not be to go down. Then it becomes extremely dangerous to go short too early. They'll often make it crystal clear to you when they finished exploring up. NQ may, for example, have a great big volume pop at the end or a massive spike surge. And you can also see on the time and sales when those orders rush in. Okay, all right. Okay, NQ's had a little bit more of an appetite. Okay, they haven't got enough fuel to go up yet, so we're going down for a little bit. We've also had a sell iceberg here in ES. So it looks like we're not ready to go up yet. So there's no momentum or impetus from that news. And it'll be interesting here. So we could say that we're in a range again. Yeah, so if I drew that back on here and said that the range was essentially about there, we're still in that range. It's only a range on that particular time period, but it is a range for that purpose. Here we are again, knocking on the door of the liquidity at 4540, and so we're within 2 ticks of the high of the day. So we're just hovering at the high of the day. And if they had not got the fuel yet, don't be surprised if they don't have a liquidity spike down to go and get that fuel. And you can see, even though NQ is actually exploring back, yet again to the edge of this range around about yesterday's high, ES is not. One of the reasons why I like looking at NQ in ETH is because these tails become more obvious. Sometimes you have to zoom out to see what is on the actual extreme of that tail. But as I said, the unfinished auction can be a double-edged sword. If there was a huge number here of sells at the bottom, that can also be enough fuel to go back up, or it can also be, in other circumstances, a signal that they are busy exploring and want to continue exploring. So we're now going to look for buy stops, buyer stops underneath yesterday's high. So they're looking for some stops here. We've got this liquidity that's marked here, which is the round number 15,900. It's getting quite close. Watching any of the other liquidity, just double click that, let's move that one up. And that's been cleared already before we even get there. We've got settlement right in this zone. So we'll have to see whether we bounce straight back up or not. And we have a nice tail now. We even have some progress on ES. There's a 1 minute range as well. So if I drag that chart back in on NQ as well and draw, I know I drew a 10-second range. Now here's the 1 minute range. And we're going to the bottom of that one. I mean, trading involves being aware of so many different things, and obviously I'm looking at all the correlations at the same time as well. Just get rid of that. Let's draw again in one of these webinars. Bring my drawing tablet. Let's have a look over at what's happened to YM and RTY after that news. So YM is still super strong. Let's get that out of the way so we can see NQ's tag settlement again. RTY is a little bit weaker. There's no weakness really at all in YM yet. And if you were saying any of the four markets was leading, I think you'd clearly say it was NQ. This is a nice little flush. So what can we do here? Let's have a look at this. That's just channeling it down, so that's not a flush. That is a flush. That is a flush. Yeah, those are often, after we've had a good move and you get a little flush like that at the end, that's often reclaimed fairly quickly. But at the moment, yeah, we're into a nice little trend down. Down here you've got yesterday's point of control. So yeah, one of the things I did say is if they didn't have the fuel just yet, don't be surprised if they don't have a liquidation spike down. And that looks like what we're having at the moment. That's why we've always got to have our eyes on both sides of the market. We can't automatically assume that it will just keep going in one direction. Okay, now that we're down here, let's have a look at the resting liquidity in NQ. There's a nice little level just above yesterday's point of control at 15,875, and they're holding that level there, so it's still there. What's happening over in ES? So we'll look at Trader Map Pro as well. Still a way to go until we get to some liquidity that's been there a while. They have that liquidity at settlement at 4524. That is clearly resting liquidity. Yeah, but you have I still have this feeling that this, even though this is currently a big fat resistance wall, it's also going to be attractive to them at some point relatively soon. Whether that's the RTH open or not, I don't know. Yeah, so if I was actually taking a trade, I would be stalking around about this liquidity down to yesterday's point of control to get along to reclaim some of what has been taken away. I also marked a range from much earlier at the London Open, and the bottom of my range in NQ was about 877, so it's really about there. That's something I marked on my charts at the time. I'm often marking ranges. Hey Tom, greetings to you. We're just watching this resistance wall and this liquidity push down to maybe get a little bit of fuel. So again, if we zoom right out in NQ, you can see this is a bit of fuel should they wish to go back up again. Or maybe they wish to go to the bottom of that range at 77-ish. But at least that's totally different from the action that we've had for the last two releases. Double check on Fed speakers. So we now have a Fed speaker. Fed Collins and Fed Barr should be speaking in 45 seconds. So again, we have to be aware of that one just in case they say something. We know that part of this extreme bullish run this week has been based on interest rate cut expectations. So if they were to say something adverse or in favor of that, that may have some momentary impact on the volatility. So we've just got to be aware of that going into 8:45 a.m. New York time. Just looking to see what they're buying in NQ. Yeah, there's a few orders going in now. Quite a few buys going in. We have this little liquidity there. Can that hold the market? You can see a little range that's developing in ES here. If you look at the actual microstructure as well in ES, it changed when we got to there. This was the first little spike down that was not immediately bought straight back up. And so it's no great surprise that that was the bottom of that particular range, and that is a range breakout down. So, and we're now in this little range here. I'm not a breakout trader. I don't think you'll hear me talk about that very often. But yeah, there was a breakout there. I would not have got it. And that's not really what I stalk or hunt. .46. So the Fed speakers, I'll turn that news feed back on just in case anything is happening. I'm not expecting any noise out of it. I think I heard one word just then, but not very much. So yeah, we were talking about this resting liquidity earlier and how we'd actually use it, and I'm saying that some of the time it acts as a nice little reversal point, some of the times it's a magnet, and sometimes it's both. So on this occasion, this little one that they put in there, it's sort of momentary resting liquidity in the sense it's only been there a few minutes. May have acted as both. No, that's just Bank of England. I don't think that's going to have that much impact right this second on the NQ. So they tag that liquidity, but it's now been removed, or any real remnant of it has gone. So we just have a quick zoom in and out, have a look. And over in ES, we've got some liquidity which is holding us in this little range here. Why are they holding us in this range, you may ask yourself, and you may come up with hypotheses. Is one of the reasons, or one of the potential reasons, that they want to trap as much seller fuel as they possibly can down here so that they can generate some fuel to go back up there? That could be one of the reasons, but we don't know. Do they want to take us back down to yesterday's high and then bounce off that, or get us back into range even? Again, we don't know. You can see with this over here, the clarity changes a lot on this depending on your current zoom level. So when we zoom to that level, you could see that this was clearly gone and that these became the paramount liquidity levels on view. So that is my point about having to, or it being worthwhile in my own opinion, to zoom in and out, because I'm trying to get the clearest liquidity picture, and that is on the basis that liquidity is still secondary to actual traded volume. I find it useful, but it's not the primary determinant. Okay, I'll turn off the news feed again. After he said that, I'm just having a look at the US dollar to see if there's any impact there on impact from the yields. I'm not seeing an awful lot of volatility in that dollar at the moment. So we're just really commenting about not very much, to be quite honest. It's me really commenting about microstructure and key levels. I'll be intrigued as well if people have actually tried out that beta of TraderMap Pro, what anybody else's thoughts are on whether they've found it useful. Remember, it's not going to work all the time. You know, sometimes it might just be a big mess. But I do like switching between them. And one thing I don't want to forget about as well are resting icebergs. I prefer the sell ones. I'm distrusting of the resting buy icebergs as a target. I'm much more interested in the resting sell ones. For example, if we'd had a resting sell iceberg just here with some nice liquidity above it, I'd be very interested in looking for a stalk to go long. But there isn't one there yet. And there's no point taking premature trades because it can continue to go a long, long way from where you want it to eventually end up before it turns around. It's better to have your own system of triggers that you've tested as reasonably effective. So what we're watching here in ES is this iceberg to see whether they are trapping enough sellers. And remember, we can always zoom in to see what is hitting the extremes. At the moment, you've got 179 sells, and you've got about 250 at the level above, 250 in total volume. And we're just watching what is happening to this iceberg. So even though it says 80, we can see 184. So that some of the cells are via the iceberg, and some of them are just happened without the iceberg. You've always got to bear that in mind, that I like to know the total volume that is potentially trapped here rather than just the iceberg number. Again, these icebergs are often taken out. Does not mean that this fuel is irrelevant. It is still relevant in my opinion. So we've now broken through that, and the next key level targets are obviously those two, yesterday's high and settlement. So we might be on a settlement drive. So if we look back in hindsight, and hindsight's always wonderful, you've got this as your resistance barrier, and that they're now moving us back to these two targets, maybe even to that one as well. I mistakenly believed, because we were so close to the week's high, that we would flush through this liquidity, go above it, take these stops out, and then come down. But that is a fallacy in trying to predict what the market will do. The market will make a fool of you every single time you start believing your own predictions. And when somebody tells us that they have an indicator that magically said, oh, it's going to go down there now, that's when you know not to believe them. If there's anybody in this industry that is telling you that they have something that can predict the future, immediately stop listening. I was talking about poker about a couple of weeks ago. The thing about trading, which is much more important than in poker itself, is you do not know who may come into the market in the next instant. That is one of the prime reasons why you cannot predict the future in trading. There may be a huge hedge fund that wants to buy here at 4,530. You can't see them, we can't see them. They don't have any orders that are visible in the book. All of a sudden they buy 1,000 ES and it shoots straight up. That was the future that you could not predict. So when somebody says, oh, I've got an indicator that's going to tell me that this is going to go up at 4,530, you have to say, really? I mean, one of the things as well, I talk about how you trade in the European Open session at the London Open. I find that having those key levels, like wanting to go and tag home and find the order imbalance at settlement, home being settlement, you'll often find that the actual order flow or the action prior to the sudden move where they just spurt right into that target, like today, where they took out settlement and the previous day's high and they kept going for a bit, there may be no order flow. It'll just be because at that time of the day they have turned on their buying algo. And until that happens, until you see that actually physically happen and there's suddenly a massive line of activity in the time and sales, there is very little that the markets are showing you. Once that is there, then a lot of your setups can come into play, and that's partly what what patience is about. Okay, let's have a look at this liquidity level on the trader map. There, so they took that one again. It looks like a nice little bounce. So I don't know if we'll get a proper bounce this time, but that's where the utility of this can come in handy. If you can see this, you've had this, it's come down here, you could have used it potentially as a target, you could use it potentially as a reversal point. That's its utility. And we need to contrast that with what we could have seen on the normal thing. You've got these millions of icebergs which can just confuse everything. If there's anything about these icebergs that is taking note, and you can see that on this sub panel here, is that they're all buy ices. So you can see the blue iceberg above the line is buy ice, and so maybe they're buy icing, in other words, absorbing all these sellers here through icebergs to drive us up. So that is where that could come in handy. Otherwise, it may be too much information to have. So yes, sometimes, what I have is I have a hotkey on my keyboard, so all I have to do is press one button and I can switch between them. I can do the same on ES, where I can go between trader map and normal MBO style heat map. You don't need a special keyboard, you can just do it with any keyboard shortcut. I just happen to be doing it with my left thumb. Why am I doing it again? It is to provide the most clarity I can get without creating any illusion for myself that I can magically predict the future and that this here would be a reversal point. I still don't know until it has reversed, i.e. hindsight, that that was going to be a reversal point. So it's just a probability that because they put this liquidity here, once they'd got down here, that they were going to wait for a test back of that demand zone and then zoom up. And the fact, that could have been a nice little scalp. That little flush we just saw reclaimed in front of our eyes. So that there was a flush, and it got it reclaimed. And that is why I have these price lines. And I'm more interested in those price lines than I am the dots. I think you've seen me in these webinars, I change the value of these dots. I've even played around with having those delta dots. But the delta dots don't do anything for me in the way that some people use them, because I look at the actual profiles, the volume profile and the delta profile, and I get the information there, and I also get the information from the pressure in the book and the time and sales that I can see in Sierra. So now let's zoom out to basically the 8:30 mark. What do we have here? We have a nice delta distribution. That's something you don't ordinarily have, but if we draw it, that is nice. because that gives you a zone. I know we're also in a little trading zone here, which we could draw like that, which almost directly relates obviously to this delta thing, but it does mean that if you were going to have a breakout above, and you can easily just keep going, this might just be a pause and a continuation. It's often, when you get this price action here, the most likely scenario is you go down, not up. But if we did manage to get above it, then that was fuel. But we just have to accept that the actual price action tends to be down from this. And the level that I was looking at really was around about this zone here. And then maybe a bounce off that and then back to settlement. And now in ES as well, we've got this. When you get that, what are they doing? They're advertising in the strongest possible terms, or they're trying to flash this to get people's attention that they'd like you to get down here, which is yesterday's high effectively, so they can fill their orders. Whether their orders are there or there or there or there, who knows? They're just advertising as strongly as they possibly can that they'd like to fill some orders around there. That's what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean that that will get filled. Let's go back and have a look at the icebergs again in. So ordinarily I would disregard the icebergs in NQ, but when you have this many, and I have this panel for that reason, then you think, well, actually, this may be irrelevant, but when you have this many irrelevants added up, it becomes a little bit more relevant. So, that is adding the weight to that, maybe that this is fuel to go up. The fact that these are all icebergs. On this occasion, we're trying to get back to the top of that range. Let's see if we can actually break out of it. Still struggling. And they've got a couple of icebergs that are live still, resting in there, so maybe they haven't finished filling their orders just yet. Let's just zoom out again on ES to see what's happened since the 8:30 news. We look at the profile and also what's down at the extremes. And you've got a little rollover there. A rollover tends to be a single figure extreme, so it's 7 here in ES, and it's one of those things that's probably more important in RTH. If you only have 7 at a significant swing point in ES, that is a true rollover. And that's often a good signal that it's going to go and auction in the other direction. So so to conclude with what we're seeing here in NQ, so even though the price action probability was to continue downwards, these icebergs actually reversed that, and they were absorbing it to get the fuel to get back up to settlement. So that's where having both those maps was actually really quite helpful. Then we are almost back to settlement, and then you have a look on the map. They've still got those levels up above. And in hindsight, again, you've got this thicker liquidity acting as the turnaround point. Okay, I think I have actually gone over my time. I was just going on and on. I hope that you have a very good RTH trading session. I wish everybody a really, really good weekend, so I will end it there. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next week. Bye.